Welcome back to Tanya in 5. The last few days we've been studying chapter 8 of book 2 in Tanya. That which we have said in chapter 7, that God and his knowledge are all one, in that he himself is invested in all of reality, and then by knowing himself, he knows all of reality, and thus there is a pure and absolute unity of his existence, of his knowledge, in that his knowledge does not increase his experience. This is true of all divine attributes: God's desire, God's wisdom, God's judgment, God's kindness. All the various different descriptions that we ascribe to God in prayer are not such that they add to his essence, but they are of an absolute and pure oneness with his essence. This absolute oneness, in Hebrew, achdus peshuta, is something that us as humans cannot truly comprehend. You see, the problem is that whenever we hear a word, we imagine it and envision it in accordance with our experience. So let's take these attributes: intelligence, love, fear, judgment, desire. Whenever we hear these words, we think about how we experience intelligence, how we experience love, how we experience a desire, and so forth. And when we experience these things, we experience a desire, let's say, we experience it as something in addition to us. It's what we call achdus morkav, a oneness that is comprised. That is to say, it's truly I that wants, and it's I that thinks, and the same I that desires and judges and so on. So there is a unity here because it's all I, but it's a unity comprised of various different elements. I want. So I and want are two different things that come together. I want. Let me explain this a little bit further. There is a process by which we experience life. I have this awareness, this idea that something is good. I think about that long enough, and then afterwards I develop a desire for that thing. After I've developed a desire for that thing, I then start to think about how I'm going to acquire that thing. I then might talk about how great that thing is, and then finally I will actually execute that desire. So we can see stages of development, each one following the next, and all of them comprised come together to make my experience. And because there are stages, there's a different relationship between me and each stage. I and my awareness of the beauty of that thing are much more closely related than my desire for that thing. Because my desire for that thing is already a movement outside of me. I want it. As opposed to my concept of it is just me. It's a concept that exists in my mind. Once I want, I'm already being pulled to the outside. Once I think about how I'm going to get it, certainly I'm very attached to the outside. I have words in my thoughts about how I'm going to implement. And then when I talk about it, those words leave me. And then when I act on it, it's certainly outside of me. Right? Because as we go down the line of this process, we go farther and farther away from the essential I. So my oneness with all of these experiences is not absolute. It's conditional to the fact that they all come together in me, and each element related to me in a different way. So it's true, I'm a singular individual, but I'm a singular individual that's comprised of multiple experiences in various different stages and various different relationships between I and those experiences. And therefore, it's impossible actually, for us to envision or to understand an absolute unity, which that we will explore further in chapter 9 in our next video. The absolute unity and oneness of God. But the takeaway from this chapter is, when we want to begin to understand the greatness of God, it's not enough to simply say, oh, God's beyond my understanding, and that's it. We first need to go through the process of understanding our limitations. The more we understand our limitations and the limitations of our experience, we can define it clearly. Here are the limitations of what I can understand. Here are the limitations of what I can experience. Then that itself, that awareness itself, opens up my mind to accept that there are certain things that are beyond. And when I am aware that there are things beyond my capacity, there are things that are beyond the limitations of my experience, it gives me a sense of humility. I'm humbled in the fact of being aware of my limitations, as well as it allows me to be a little less petty in my life. A little less petty. When I'm aware and I spend time thinking about my limitations and that there are things beyond me, I start to look at some of the things in my life that are petty and let go of them. Try it. You'll see. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 9.